Death by Beer. That's gotta be one hell of a brew. Today's Ancient DOS game is titled Quest for Glory, so you want to be a hero? It used to be known as Hero's Quest, but earlier the same year this game came out, Milton Bradley came out with their Hero Quest board game series, so the name was changed pretty quickly as a result. This is one of the more interesting games released by Sierra in that it combines aspects of the inventory-based adventures they were known for with aspects from traditional role-playing games, such as being able to choose different classes of characters and being able to advance your own skills so that they could be used to solve problems. A lot of people enjoyed this game because of this merging of genres, and I will admit, there's a lot of stuff to like about this game, but I personally just couldn't really get into it. And even after several hours with both the original and the remake, I just got bored and frustrated with the game's little quirks. Well, I'll do my best to focus on both the positives and the negatives, so that all of you can judge for yourselves if it's worth your time and money to check it out, if you've never played it before. Also, I'll be focusing on the remake for most of this review, because overall, it's just much better than the original, but I'll give some notes about the original towards the end of the episode. Quest for Glory was originally created and released in 1989 by Sierra Online and is a one-player inventory adventure / RPG hybrid. It supports Hercules, CGA, Tandy, EGA, and MCGA graphics adapters, running at 320 by 200 resolution with all but the special Hercules mode, and supports 2 to 16 colors, again depending on the video mode. Optimally, any of the 16 color modes look just fine, and unlike previous Sierra titles, your sound support is not locked to the video mode you choose. And rightly so, because this game supports a massive number of sounded music devices. It's even one of the few games I know of with support for the IBM Music feature card. However, it's probably simplest to just select Sound Blaster support, even though there's no digitized sound effects. As for its current release date, the game's still commercial, but available from the Good Old Games website at www.gog.com as a package of the first 5 Quest for Glory games all together for $10, including both versions of the original game. If you're looking to collect a boxed copy, then be ready to spend a lot of money. The cheapest boxed copies I could find that were in good condition were at least $30 or more. Not to mention, it's hard to tell if you're getting the original game with the name change, or the remake. The anthology CDs aren't very cheap either, so if you just want the game to play and not to collect, you're better off going with a digital download. Looking at the game stats for the remake, they're virtually identical, except of course the remake was released in 1992 and supports different graphics and audio hardware. Now, the game runs using either EGA 16 color or VGA 256 color graphics, plus has digitized sound effects which play back with the Sound Blaster support or through any of a number of different sound cards. Again, if you buy the Quest for Glory collection from GOG.com, you get both versions of the first game, so you can decide for yourself which you like better. The story of the game is fairly simple. You play the role of a character who's recently graduated from the famous Adventurers Correspondence School for Heroes. While figuring out how to get yourself going, you spot a posting in your local Adventurers Guild made by a place called Spielberg, as they're looking for a hero to help them out. But most importantly, the posting makes it a point of saying no experience necessary, which really catches your attention. So, after a month's journey across some rather treacherous terrain, you finally end up in front of the town gates and are ready to help the citizens of Spielberg in whatever ways they need. Really, the game kind of just comes down to making your own story, as there's several different quests to solve, and while there is a particular order to beat them in that makes the most sense, you're really just going through it however you see fit, ultimately reaching the final goal of finishing every quest with as high a score as possible. The The gameplay in the original Quest for Glory used an early version of the Sierra Creative Interpreter engine, and thus while it had mouse support, it was generally more prudent to stick with the keyboard, especially considering you used a text parser to type in the different things you wanted to do as you traveled from screen to screen. Here in the remake, the entire game is mouse-driven for the most part, though you can still use some keyboard commands to help you out, especially in combat. When you first start a new game, you have to create your character, starting with choosing your character's class, either a fighter, magic user, or thief. The class you choose ultimately determines how you're going to approach and solve various problems you run into as you play the game. Plus, it will also affect how you should distribute your points into the stats you have, which there's quite a number of, so I'm not going to go into specifics. What I will say, though, is that fighters should focus on strength and weapon use, magic users should focus on intelligence and magic, while thieves should probably focus on agility, luck, and stealth. The primary mode of gameplay is moving around to various screens, investigating objects, finding things, trying stuff out, etc. Typical stuff for an inventory-based adventure game. By moving the mouse to the top of the screen, you can access various buttons, including the ability to rest, cast spells, check stats, open your inventory, or even check the time of day, as there's a day and night system going on in the background in this game and can have quite the influence on what you'll find and what you can do. Not to mention, it's typically safer to travel around during the daytime than night. You also have to keep yourself fed and get some sleep every now and then. Although you can go to sleep virtually anywhere, most locations will get you killed or mugged, so it's always a good idea to find an acceptable place to sleep first. There's an inn you can stay at in the town and a cave to the south by a waterfall, which is easy enough to get to as well, but the best place to sleep is Arana's Peace, up in the northernmost part of the map, as sleeping there will restore all of your stats to maximum, plus there's food growing on the tree to eat and flowers to pick which you can sell to the healer for some extra cash. Now, speaking of the healer, there's a minor puzzle right outside her door that serves as a great example of all the different ways you'll solve problems in this game based on the character class you select. There's a nest up in a tree with a ring in it, and you need to get that ring. If you're playing as a fighter, the typical solution is to pick up some rocks from the ground and throw them at the nest until it falls down. If you're playing as a magic user, all you need to do is cast the fetch spell to fetch the nest and bring it towards you. If you're playing as a thief, you simply need to climb the tree to get right at the nest, though this can take a number of attempts, building up your climbing skill the entire time. And that's actually one of the interesting things about this game, is that while you do have experience points, you don't have experience levels. Instead, every time you do something or something happens to you which draws off of one of your stats, there's a fair chance that that stat will improve slightly. As a result, it's possible to get your stats pretty high, though it can take quite a lot of gameplay depending on what it is you're trying to improve. It's also important to keep in mind that stats that start at 0 cannot be improved at all, and while you can give your character abilities that they don't normally start with, it costs an extra 10 skill points to do so, thus making the game more challenging in the short run. Just like an RPG, you'll have random encounters as you walk around in this game. And you have the ability to make your character run, which can help you get away from these enemies, but under ideal circumstances, you should fight them to gain combat experience. The combat system is actually kinda wonky. The idea is that you have keys for performing different actions, such as attacking, dodging, blocking, etc., and you choose which action you want to perform based on what the enemy seems to be doing or seems to be preparing to do. The trouble is that the combat system suffers from quite a bit of lag, which doesn't help when many of your actions have to be performed with precise timing in order for them to have any effect. And sometimes I won battles that I was pretty sure I was going to lose going into them, and other times I lost battles that I really shouldn't have just because the system was being difficult or my timing was slightly off, making 90% of my attacks miss or something. The combat system was ambitious for sure, but really, the active time nature of it combined with its lag issues just makes me yearn for something more predictable, like an old turn-based system or such. But that actually leads into the major flaw of the game: time. Now, at the time this game came out, day and night transitions were few and far between for video games, so there weren't really any standards for how to handle them or anything. So having such a system was a neat thing in its own right. The trouble is that time doesn't pass very fast, and there's no way to quickly advance time to the point you need it to be at in order to do something. So you actually spend a surprising amount of time just going from screen to screen, waiting for enough game time to pass so you can do something specific, like sleep. If not for the fact that sleeping or drinking expensive health potions were the only two ways to restore your hit points, this whole wasting time thing would have only been a minor issue. As such, if you run low on health and it's still mid-morning or something, that means you gotta burn a ton of time doing stuff you'd rather not be doing just to get it late enough in the day that you can finally go to sleep and get your health back. About 1/4 of all the time I spent playing this game was taken up by doing absolutely nothing practical, just waiting for time to pass so I could continue doing what I wanted to do. And to me, that doesn't make for a fun experience. This should be obvious to any person who has any experience at all with Sierra's adventure titles, but save often and keep multiple saves. It is so easy to die in this game, especially if you're not keeping track of your stats. Another big tip is to find Arana's Peace as early as you can, since it's the only place where you can effortlessly restore your health to maximum, provided it's late enough in the day to go to sleep. The simplest way to get to Arana's Peace is to go north from the town gates, west from the healers, as far north as possible from the Centaur's farm, one screen east, then finally one screen north. Another useful tip is to throw daggers or cast spells at hostile targets before you engage them in combat. This helps to whittle their health down so that when you do engage them in combat, it won't be as difficult. Alas, daggers cost 20 silver or 2 gold each, so it can take some time and a lot of money to build up a healthy stock of them. Or if you're playing as a magic user, the flame dart spell costs 60 silvers or 6 gold, but at least you get to keep it forever. Another simple tip I have is to take a rest after any combat or doing anything that drains your stamina to some extent. The game allows you to take rests in increments of 10, 30, or 60 minutes, during which time you'll restore some stamina, some magic, and maybe a couple or 3 health points. These rests may not seem like much, but will help extend how much stuff you can do without having to go wandering around waiting for time to pass. My final tip is to be persistent. Many of the things that happen in this game is based on your stat numbers, much like playing Dungeons and Dragons. If something doesn't work out, it may simply be that your numbers aren't high enough. When you look at your stats screen, any numbers that are different from the last time you viewed your stats will be red to help indicate what stats are changing. You can use this to help figure out what things you should be doing to help improve specific stats. Then when they're high enough to your satisfaction, you can try doing more dangerous things. Now just a quick look at the original game. While it appears a lot different on the surface, much of what you do is exactly the same as in the remake, but there's 2 major improvements in the remake over the original: conversations and combat. In the original game, you don't get a list of topics to ask people about. Instead, if you want to talk to someone about something, you have to ask them about that specific subject. This can make it really difficult to figure out just what it is you should be doing in the first place. As for the combat system, the lag in the original game is so bad that combat is virtually impossible to win without simply holding down the attack button and hoping for the best. As a result, trying to dodge and block will get you more hurt in the long run than simply attacking constantly. This alone should be enough of a reason to avoid the original and simply focus on the remake. Besides which, the enemies are dumbed down slightly in the remake so that you don't need really high stats to fight even the most basic ones. One thing I will say about the original that's better than in the remake is viewing your inventory. Now sure, the remake has graphics of the items you can get, a feature that's surprisingly absent from the original, but in order to see the quantity of any items you have in the remake, you have to select the eyeball icon and click on an item. Here in the original game, you get a simple, itemized list with all the quantities listed. Much more convenient. Overall, the original Quest for Glory and even its remake were highly ambitious games that put a whole new spin on the adventure genre by adding RPG elements. While these games are certainly flawed, they're still very playable and have plenty of content to discover through hours of gameplay. To me though, the lack of any control over the process of time, combined with how difficult it is to keep your hit points from dropping to nothing, makes it seem as though the game is artificially extended, taking much longer to play than it really should. And that's just my opinion though. There's a lot to like here, and a lot of people love this game for completely understandable reasons. If you're a fan of Sierra's stuff, or just a fan of inventory-based adventure games in general, it's definitely worth checking out. If you're playing the original game, setting it up in DOSBox is really simple. Just set a fixed cycles count of about 10,000 and you should be good to go. The auto setting works at first, but once you reach combat, the lag will make it completely unplayable due to timing problems, so that's why you need to set a fixed cycles count. If you're playing the remake, the auto setting doesn't properly detect how much power the game needs, and the max setting just makes certain things go by way too fast. So again, you need to set a fixed cycles count. I recommend a setting of about 20,000, though you might want to go a little less if some of the animations seem a little too fast for you. Also, the class selection screen seems to have some nasty delays going on, and I wasn't able to figure out if this was due to DOSBox or just the way the game works in general, so don't be surprised if you have to wait a few moments after the character select screen pops up before you can do anything. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. The next episode's on Groundhog Day, Saturday, February 2nd, and I'm going to be taking a look at a game that's kind of like Gravatar on the Atari 2600. However, the focus of this game is dogfighting and racing. If you think you know which game this is, then make sure to send your guess to ADG@pixelships.com and stay tuned as we take a look at this easily forgotten game.